right. All right, I bid you greetings from Houston, Texas. That's where I'm from. This is actually my third time in Budapest. The last time I was here, I spoke at a conference called Craft. If you have not been to Craft, you should go. Craft is a wonderful conference and well worth your time and money. But I'm really happy to be here at Stretch. And I want to speak about diversity and inclusion, a topic that we've heard on and off throughout this past few years about how it should work, about how we can make the technology world look more like the real world, and where the representation of the tech world should match the representation of what we see in this world. And I've been very fortunate to speak with a lot of companies about diversity and inclusion, and often they ask me, well, how can we modify our policies to be more diverse and inclusive? Or how can we modify our hiring process to be more diverse and inclusive? But those really aren't the right questions, because inclusion is coming. Inclusion is coming. And the right question that companies should ask is, how can we be prepared for inclusion? What can we do to make sure that we're ready for this coming wave of people who have been historically underrepresented in technology as they come into our companies? Because this is a change that every company is going to have to make. And to make that change, it's not going to be a policy change. It's not going to be a change in how we select people. It's going to be us. We have to stretch ourselves to help our companies get ready. And the truth is that this is something that's been going on for quite a while, meaning that underrepresented groups, and especially women, have been for centuries working to burst into these company walls. Walls that were often erected to keep them out. And we are seeing a change in how this works. We're seeing a change in the ways that companies value people whose voices have not been at the table. And I, for one, I'm happy to see this, and I think that the concept of lending privilege can be extremely powerful for helping us do this. But the challenge is that even though companies are beginning to value those new voices that are coming into their corporate walls, there are still challenges. We see big companies, even in the past few weeks, have issues with how they treat women. We've seen big companies have men who create toxic environments for the women who work in these companies, but then they are able to leave with huge paychecks and huge packages. So there's still a way to go in making sure that our industry is as diverse and inclusive as it should be. But this is not a new problem. In fact, there was a TV show in the 60s where there was an actor. And this actor was one of the stars on this show. And this actor learned that a fellow actor who happened to be a woman was not paid as much as the men, right? So there's this pay disparity between the male actors and between this woman actress. And so this actor decided that he would take action. He went to the people who owned this show. This show was fairly popular during its time, and he demanded equal pay for this actress. He said that if I'm going to be a part of this show, then I'm going to make sure that she's paid as much as I am. Now, the actor was Leonard Nimoy, who played Spock, and the actress was Nichelle Nichols, who played Uhura. And Leonard Nimoy was successful. He lobbied Paramount to get paid for Nichelle, and it worked. She got pay equal to the male actors. And that's how lending privilege worked. In many ways, Leonard Nimoy lent Nichelle his privilege, his gender privilege as a male actor, but also his influence with the fans. And I think that that's a powerful model for how we can make our industry more inclusive, how we as leaders can have a movement where we're going to see these problems, and we're not going to wait for HR to create some policy. We're not going to wait for some maybe outside consultant to come in and help us. We're going to take action because we believe that it's right. We believe that we have to create an industry that welcomes everyone, an industry that welcomes talent no matter what it's wrapped in. We don't care what gender it's wrapped in. We don't care what color it's wrapped in. We don't care the level of physical ability that it's wrapped in. We want all talent to come in because we're solving big problems in technology. Many of you are working in machine learning and in AI, and these are big problems. And the challenge is that we're often teaching our technology to be as biased as we are. Studies have shown that AI, when used in court cases, is beginning to exhibit the same biases that humans do, meaning that certain groups of people get harsher sentences than others based on the color of their skin. So we don't resolve our issues with inclusion and diversity, then we're going to have our technology inherit those problems as well. So it's going to take a mindset of inclusion, and I think lending privilege is a really powerful way to help us get into that mindset. And again, I really think that this is going to be a grassroots movement that everyone here can be a part of. Now, I think that Leonard Nimoy was very before his time. Leonard Nimoy was down with equal pay for equal work way before it became cool. But I think that Nimoy also saw things that would come to pass. I think he foresaw this study by ASA about diversity in pay. And ASA, which is a group in the States, found that when you have a racial and gender representation within a company, then you get better business results. So what that means is, as companies become more gender diverse and racially representative, then you get better business results, right? Companies that are inclusive, companies that are diverse, have better business results. That means revenue, that means profit, that means costs go down, that means you get better ideas. And we all work in software, and the lifeblood of our industry is innovation. So if we want innovation, then we're going to have to solve this problem. But not only that, I think that Nimoy saw this study by Peterson about gender diversity and is it profitable? This came out in 2016. And so Peterson found that if a firm is profitable, if you simply increase the representation of female leaders by 30%, that results in a 15% increase in net revenue margin. Again, there's a strong business case for inclusion and diversity. And I could quote Harvard Business Review articles and all kinds of research that shows this, but the case is clear. There is a business reason and there's business sense in doing this work. There's business benefit in helping our companies become more diverse and inclusive. Now, I've been using diversity and inclusion interchangeably, but they're not the same thing. So in many ways, if you think about it, diversity is like you're throwing a party, right? There's parties in Budapest, right? You've all been to a party in Budapest, hopefully? But like, let's say you're throwing a party and you invite people because you want people to come to your party. So you get some envelopes and you have the invitation inside and you write the addresses on the outside. You seal it, you put a stamp on it, and so you might invite people from your schooling or people from college or people from work, and you send out those invitations. That is diversity. It's inviting people to come in. But inclusion goes further than diversity. Inclusion is making sure that people feel welcome when they get to your party. You may know that certain people came a long way. I came all the way from Texas. So you're a little bit more appreciative for the people who came a long way. Or maybe there are people who you know don't drink alcohol. So you make sure that there are beverage options for them that don't have alcohol. But that's what inclusion means. Inclusion is simply having empathy. And it's knowing that people had different journeys to get to you. People had different routes to get to you, and some of those routes were harder than the one that you walked. And so it's having empathy and being sensitive to those different paths to get into your company. So that's inclusion. Inclusion goes further than diversity. Diversity, you really only need a stamp. So now that I've explained that, I want to go into the fact that I really believe that it's going to be a grassroots movement. I really believe that if we're going to solve this inclusion and diversity problem, it's going to take all of us. And the fact is that a lot of companies, and maybe your company's like this, they put diversity and inclusion work in HR, in human resources, meaning that those are the departments that often have the task of making their companies more inclusive. And that's fine, but the reality is that HR departments, they work for the people who pay for them. So there is not a great incentive for these departments to do the hard work of making companies inclusive. And time again, we've seen this happen where usually a man is accused by a woman of bad behavior, and so the woman goes to HR to find help, and it's the woman who winds up leaving the company, right? Where the woman was the victim in this case, because HR departments exist to protect the company. They don't exist to protect you. So it's going to take us. It's going to take a grassroots movement of people who are motivated to do what's right, to do not only is right from a morality standpoint, but to do what's right because this is really good for business. And we work in software, most of us, and the good news is that if you work in software, there's a great model for grassroots movements. Many of you probably work in open source, or you use it at your companies. And open source was this radical idea. It's old now, but during the time it was so exciting. And Eric S. Raymond wrote a book called The Cathedral and the Bazaar. And that's where he was exploring this radical new thing of open source software. And so that was the idea that you would take a piece of code and make it available to everyone to work on. And everyone could come in and work on the code. They could add new features, they could fix bugs, they could work on other aspects of developing the software. And particularly, Raymond was studying the rise of Linux. And Linux is old hat now, but Linux was actually a threat when it was coming out. In fact, Steve Ballmer from Microsoft called Linux a cancer. So Linux was this project, this movement to take a kernel and to create a fully fledged operating system. And of course, in the early days, and many of you pulled down those early builds of Linux, and it was kind of rough. But over time, it got more robust. Because with open source, you can marshal so many resources. And so Raymond called the top-down command and control model that Microsoft had, that Apple had, as a cathedral, right? The idea that in the cathedral, power is centralized, and all the major decisions happen from that top power structure. But he also had the bazaar model, and that was open source. In open source, there's no centralized control. Everyone has power distributed to them. Everyone has the power to make the software better. And one of the most well-known quotes from this book is this one, which is, given enough eyeballs, all bugs are shallow. So what does that mean? That means that if you have enough people working on your software, if you have enough people looking at your code, you increase the chance that you'll find a defect. You increase the chance that you will find a problem, and also that you'll have someone who can fix it. And I really like the way that the book expresses it this way, which is this one, which is, and again, this is written in a couple of decades old language, but if you have a big enough tester and developer base, then almost every problem will be characterized quickly and the fix obvious to someone. That means that if we can grow the number of people who come into our open source project and get more developers and testers working on it, then someone's going to see the problem. Because having a diversity of opinion and a diversity of experience gives you innovation. It increases the opportunity and the likelihood that you will find a solution. And what Raymond was saying, he may disagree with me, and people on Twitter tell me that he probably would not agree, but this is a statement of inclusion. That means that if we can get more people to come into our software projects, then we'll be able to build better solutions. We'll be able to fix it because someone out there can solve the problem. Someone out there understands what it takes to build a feature that you're trying to develop. But the reality is that we keep these people out all too often, just like we protect our repositories. All too often, we block people out because they lack privilege. They lack gender privilege or racial privilege, so we keep them out. And by keeping out these people, we're keeping out the ability to solve problems. We're keeping out the ability to truly build the next generation of software. Now that I've explained that, I do want to explain what privilege is not. Privilege does not mean you haven't worked hard. Privilege does not mean that you've had it easy. What it means is that you're like this person who's riding a bike up a hill. And it's hot, and you're starting to get a cramp in your left leg, and you're trying to get up that hill, so you're working hard, but there are other people who are also trying to get up that hill who have obstacles. And those obstacles occur because they lack privilege. They may not have happened to be born as a male, or they may have a different color skin, or even a different ethnic background. But not having these privileges means that they run into obstacles that people with privilege don't even see. People with privilege don't even come across these because you can't see them because of your privilege. And so many times, I've had people share with me the problems of not having privilege. I've had women who are amazing software developers share with me that they have to change their outfits multiple times when they come to work or before they come to work because they're wondering, well, this may not be an outfit that will cause people to respect me. Or if I wear this, then people may get the wrong idea about me. And that's really tragic because by keeping half the population out of software, we're keeping all the innovation out of software. And really, when we hire women to work in our companies, all too often they have to fill two roles, right? One is the role that they were hired to do. Maybe it's a software developer, or maybe they're a tester, or maybe they work in DevOps. But then there's the other role, the role of fighting all the stereotypes that we still have about women in 2018. All of the ideas that we have, the false ideas that we have about women. And women have shared with me that that's exhausting. Why don't we get rid of the second role? Why don't we just let women do the jobs that we have hired them to do? And I think that lending privilege can be a powerful way to do that. So now that I've explained what privilege is not, what is privilege? Privilege is simply access. It's access to benefits based on traits that you possess. And that could be benefits like an education, could be the benefit of living in a good neighborhood, it could be the benefit of having parents who could pay for your schooling and support you financially. Those are benefits. And I separate privilege into two categories. So one is called birth privilege. And that's what the two people who made you gave you, right? So that's your gender, that's your race, that may be your level of physical ability, right? That's birth privilege. That's what you came into the world having. But then there's a second category of privilege, and that's what I call selected privileges. And these are things that you select as you grow. And that might be where you go to school, that might be the job that you have, that might be the religion that you have. And so this combination of birth privileges and selected privileges create what I call your portfolio of privileges. And I have a few examples here that I wanted everyone to look at. Now, everyone look up here and think about a privilege that you have. Maybe you have gender privilege, maybe you have racial privilege, but think about a privilege up here that you have. I'll give you a couple seconds to do that. And some of you may have all of these, but think about what would your career in tech be if you did not have gender privilege, or if you did not have racial privilege, or maybe you didn't go to a top school, or maybe you had a physical disability. Maybe you couldn't see, or you were forced to use a wheelchair. how much harder would your journey in tech be without those privileges? It would have been pretty tough. But there are people you work with who don't have your privilege, and so they have a hard time going through their career too. I think we can lend our privilege that we can create a true level playing field where everyone can prosper and everyone can thrive in our industries and in our companies. So I have 3 examples of lending privilege, and for each one, I have a person, and these are real people, but I'm going to give them just made-up names. Let's call them B, L, and M. I'm going to just use these images to explain each type of lending privilege. I'm going to describe the lending type. I'm going to give you an example, hopefully, that we can all reference. And then I'm going to give you an example of how this can work in your companies. So the first type of privilege is what I call credibility lending. Credibility lending. And that's where you lend visibility to people who lack privilege. Now, I have friends who are LGBTQ, and they often tell me that they feel like they're invisible in our industry. They're invisible in most of the conferences that we go to, and even inside corporate walls. Because we have a very heteronormative industry, right? We just assume that heterosexuality and so many other ways that we express gender, we have a norm for that. And that often excludes them, and they feel invisible. Well, here's an example of how credibility lending works. So there's a show with Colbert that you can see up here, and on the Colbert show, the Colbert Report, DeRay McKesson, who is a well-known activist, came on. And Colbert switched seats with DeRay. As you can look up here, DeRay is in the host chair, and Colbert is in the guest chair. And Colbert did that because he wanted to raise the visibility of this activist. And I think that this really was a point where DeRay began to get more visible. But that's how lending credibility works. It's giving a platform for people to use so that they can be seen. So how can this work at your company? Well, here's B, and she was the one who completed that killer feature in your last release, right? She worked long hours and weekends to get it done. And she is a rock star developer, but the challenge is that for the executive team at your company, they don't even know her name, right? In fact, B is often stopped by security because they don't know she belongs there. Or when she's working late, people think she's one of the janitorial staff, right? She thinks that she's one of the people who are asked to clean the building because people like her usually aren't seen until after hours. And, I've been stopped at companies that I work for, like, are you security? I'm like, no, I'm an engineering manager. But because how I look, people make assumptions about, do I belong there? Well, why not the next time you have the opportunity to present to the executive team, why not bring B along, right? She made that feature. Why not include her work in your slide deck and maybe even give her a chance to present what she did? And by doing that, you're raising her visibility in your company. You're giving her the opportunity to shine. And I really want to make sure that I'm clear that when we lend privilege, we're not speaking for someone, we're speaking with someone, right? That doesn't mean that we talk about people and their work, people who lack privilege, but it means that we give them space and we get out of the way to let their own gifts and their own skill set shine. So that's the first type of privilege that I wanted to share with you. Second type is what I call access lending, and that's providing entry for someone who lacks privilege. And I shared before that women in tech often feel that because they lack gender privilege, they experience things like sexism and exclusion. And again, women bring such a great value to our companies that we're losing out on so much by keeping them out of our companies, and really, more importantly, keeping them from rising in the ranks in our companies. And I think that access lending can help us to fix this. So here's an example. The woman on the right is an actress named, on your right is an actress named Jessica Chastain. On the left is Octavia Butler. Now, these are two amazing actresses. They worked together in a film a few years ago, and actually this happened last year. They were slated to work in another film. Well, Jessica very similar to what happened with Leonard Nimoy, learned that Octavia Butler, that Octavia was being offered a much lower pay than she was. And so keep in mind that Octavia is like an Oscar-nominated actress. I mean, she's one of the top actresses in the world, but the studio was offering far less pay to her. So Jessica went to the studio and said, you know what? You're going to pay Octavia what you're paying me, Octavia Spencer. And again, it worked. By advocating for Octavia, Jessica allowed her to get paid the same, right? And that is how access lending works. You bring people into rooms that would normally be close to them, and you make sure that they're being treated and respected as well as you are. So how can this work? So here is Elle, and right, she is someone who spent a lot of time implementing your Docker strategy. She's been really helping your DevOps get really to the next level. So why not, when your company decides who to send to conferences like this, or to send to conferences like Docker conferences, why not send her? Why not give your space in that conference and your space in the budget to someone like her so that she can feel like she belongs? Give her access to that room so that she can see that she's valued in this industry. And I've seen so many junior developers go to conferences and learn and be around other developers that they improve, they grow from that experience. And by sending people to conferences so that they can get those skills who lack privilege, then you're really building a foundation for the future of your company's ability to be innovative. All right, so the last type of lending privilege I want to share is what I call expertise lending. And that's providing a voice to people without privilege. Now, I'm a person of color, and I don't see a lot of people like me in technology. I worked in technology for 20 years, and so many times when I walk into the room, I'm the only person of color in the room. Or I might be the only person of color in the entire building. And sometimes that gives you the feeling that, well, do I really belong here? And I think that expertise lending can help to fix this. So here's an example. A few years ago, former First Lady Michelle Obama was at a conference called South by Southwest in Austin, Texas. And I was at this conference and I saw her husband, Barack Obama, former president, give a talk, but I couldn't hear Michelle give her talk. But she made a quote that really stuck with me. And she said that if you've got a voice at the table, ask, is there diversity around the table? Are there voices and opinions that don't sound like yours? So how can this work at your company? Well, here's M. And M just, she's a one-person onboarding team. Whenever someone joins the team, she lets them know, here's the code base, and here's where all the skeletons are buried in our code. And she's really great at helping people join the team, get upskilled, and be productive. She's been doing this for years. Well, why not lend her some privilege? Why not the next time that next project comes, that you know is one of those get promoted projects, because it's such a meaty project, why not give her the opportunity to lead? Why not propose that she lead the project? And of course, don't just propose, support. As she does the project, why not give her some support so that she can be positioned to feel that she is valued as an expert and as a leader in your company? So those are 3 examples of lending privilege, and I hope that you thought of some as I've been speaking. And I really want to make sure we all understand that this really isn't hard. I'm not asking you to spend hours and hours and hours a week doing this. It's really a mindset. It's saying, I'm going to open my eyes to the experiences of people who don't look like me. And as I find roadblocks and obstacles in their journey, I'm going to do what I can to help them. It doesn't mean that you do this once, and I want to be very clear, this is not a silver bullet. This is something that you have to keep trying, and it's a mindset that you have to make part of how you think about the world. But it's powerful, and it works, and it's needed. It's so needed in our companies. If we're going to make our companies be the companies that we can be proud of, I really hope that you join this grassroots movement. Now, a few years ago, I was at a conference where Common, who's a rapper, is anyone know who Common is? That might be my black privilege speaking. But Common's a well-known rapper, and he has a lot of great songs. And one of the songs that I really liked was for a movie called Selma. And Common co-wrote this song with John Legend. It's a great song. It's called Glory. And the chorus of Glory goes like this. One day, when the glory comes, it will be ours. It will be ours. Because lending privilege and diversity and inclusion does not mean that women win, doesn't mean that black people win, doesn't mean that LGBTQ people win or people who are handicapped win. It means we all win because we're making our industry one that lets everyone come in and make contributions. We're gonna destroy these walls, these invisible walls that we've built that keep people out of our companies. And I really think that that's very, very powerful. Now, a few years ago, you may have heard that in the United States we had an election. Someone became president, and due to a series of circumstances, the ACLU offered a copy of the Constitution of the United States to anyone who wanted one. So I filled out a form, and I got one. I've been carrying this around ever since. Now, the Constitution is not just a document, right? It's a set of ideas. And I think a large part of why the United States is such a powerful country is this. And so over time, I read through the Constitution, and I haven't really read it since I was maybe a teenager for school. But I began reading the Constitution. I was like, this holds up pretty well. We have Article 1, which talks about the Congress, and Article 2, which talks about the executive branch, and then Article 3, which talks about the Supreme Court. But I kept reading the Constitution, and I was like, wait a minute. The Founding Fathers put a pull request system into the government. They're called amendments. And that means that you can propose a change and have it reviewed and get it merged in to the government. It's a messy process. We've only done it a few times in 200 years, but it works. And just like in your software, maybe you've looked at some pull requests, and there's a lot of good stuff in pull requests. And there's a lot of good stuff in the amendments. So when I think about the amendments, I think about the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, which some people think made it illegal to enslave black people. But that's not what it says. The 13th Amendment says it's illegal in the United States, where slavery was legal for centuries. It made it illegal to enslave anyone. Now, I'm the descendant of slaves. My ancestors came to America, owned boats as property, and forced to work for free. And I'm sure that my ancestors rejoiced when they heard about the 13th. But really, everyone in America should have rejoiced because they now lived in a country where everyone was truly free, where everyone's freedom was preserved and enshrined in the Constitution. If you keep reading the amendments, you find one where we gave women the right to vote. Unfortunately, in America, we didn't let women vote for a long, long time. We finally got that right. And so when we passed that amendment, I'm sure a lot of women were happy that they were able to now enter into the franchise and cast their votes. But really, every American should have been happy because we now lived in a country where your gender would not be held against you at the ballot box. And leaving the amendments a few years ago in my country, we realized that gay marriage is just marriage. And we said, you know what? Marry who you love. And everyone should have celebrated that because we now live in a country where we did not penalize you for who you loved. So our country, my country, has tried to solve the peculiar problems of race and gender and how we treat LGBTQ people. And it's been a struggle, but we've made progress. And we all work in an industry where we have our own peculiar problems. And it's going to be a struggle. But we can do it. We can do it if we're dedicated to lending our privilege. Now, I know that some of you may be saying, you know what, that sounds kind of cool, but I just want to go to work. I just want to do my job. I just want to get my teams organized, and I just want to work on my projects, and I don't have time for all this diversity and inclusion talk. And I get that. This is not easy. In fact, some studies have shown that people who even talk about diversity and inclusion are penalized. And I've spoken about this for a long, long time. And it can be daunting to do this. It can be daunting to say, I'm going to take a stand for what's right. I'm going to put my career on the line. I'm going to expose myself to make my company and my industry more inclusive and more diverse. But that's stretching, right? If you've ever exercised and you stretch, it hurts a little bit. You feel a little bit of strain as you stretch your biceps and your triceps, your calves. Many of you probably run or lift weights. And stretching hurts. But if you stretch properly, you'll be able to lift weights more safely. You'll be able to prevent further harm if you stretch first. So yeah, stretching is painful often, but in the long run, it prevents injury. And I think this work is like that. I think if we want to stretch ourselves, if we want to make the community of our industry one where we accept everyone, then we're going to have to stretch. It's going to hurt a little bit, but I think it's worth it. And you know what? I'm not sure this happened, but when Leonard Nimoy went into the offices of Paramount and said, you know what, we're not paying Michelle the same amount that I'm being paid, and that's not right, I'm sure that some of the studio executives may have said, we're making a sci-fi TV show. What does paying a black woman have to do with that? Again, I don't know if this happened, but I hope if Nimoy was posed that question, he would say it has everything to do with making a sci-fi TV show. Because Leonard Nimoy played Spock, a character that is wrapped around the idea of infinite diversity and infinite combinations. And I have to believe that Leonard Nimoy knew that he wanted that to be not something that's just in Star Trek, but that it existed in the real world. That he wanted to make the industry of television one where we celebrated infinite diversity and infinite combinations. And I really hope that you'll join this work that Nimoy has been engaged in, this work that many of your colleagues have been engaged in, because it's worth it. Because if we want the software industry to be innovative, if we want our companies to be companies where no bug is deep, if we want to really stretch ourselves, then I encourage all of you to walk in your responsibility to be a lender. Be a lender. Look around and see the people who are having a hard time simply because of something they did not choose for themselves. And this heaviness, this weight of not having privilege, it has an impact. It has an impact in our ability to go through our day. It has an impact in our ability to even do our work. It has an impact on our productivity. It's so wasteful. But if we take up this work, if we make it part of our responsibility, if we don't wait for HR to figure this out or for some consultant or some guy on stage, then we can do it. We can do it. It wasn't easy for my country, the United States, to get rid of slavery. It took a long time. It took a lot of blood, a lot of sweat, a lot of tears. But we fixed that problem. It's illegal to own slaves in America. Giving women the right to vote, also, hard problem. A lot of blood, a lot of sweat, a lot of tears. A lot of people who I respect in history were involved in that work to give women suffrage, the right to vote. LGBTQ people and that community, we're still working on that. But we have made a lot of progress. I live in a country where even me going for a drive, there's a little bit of risk because I know that I could be pulled over and that could be the last drive I ever take because of a police officer looking at the color of my skin and seeing me as a threat. We're working on that. So we solved a lot of problems, but we still have a ways to go. So I want to warn you, it's not going to be easy. It's going to take time. It won't take all your time, but it will take some time. And it's changing your mind and changing your heart and being able to have empathy for people who you work with every day. So I encourage you, all of you, to be a lender. Thank you. All right, I think we have time for Q&A.
Yes, we do. Thank you very much for that. So we do have Slido questions over here, and we'll go over at least some of the few first ones. I think in this order. Let's start with the first one. So yeah, the Me Too movement.
Yes.
Obviously very well publicized and spoken about widely. How do you think that impacts diversity and inclusion?
I think Me Too is a powerful movement. I think we all know this, that this is a hashtag on Twitter where women share that they too have been subject to, unfortunately, horrible things that have happened to women. Harvey Weinstein, a very powerful man in the media, was uncovered and outed as someone who had done horrible things to women in that industry. And that movement has mobilized a lot of women to lend their voices, to raise their hand and say, this happened to me too. And by doing that, by helping people understand how widespread this is, I think that raised understanding. We've seen powerful people. Bill Cosby is going to be sitting in a prison cell pretty soon. There are probably people, more people. And I think that it's been a great movement. And I think that, in my country, we just had the midterm elections. We sent an unprecedented number of women to Congress, which was an amazing event. And I think the Me Too movement, and other reasons that I won't talk about, but I think that Me Too was a big part of that. And so I think that if you feel like you're safe, and again, this is not something that you should do if you don't feel safe, but if you do, as a woman, share your story, share your journey, say, you know what, this happened to me. I've had people doubt me simply because I'm a woman, or I hit a glass ceiling, or I was mistreated simply because I'm a woman. And by sharing those stories, by having the bravery to do that, you're going to raise awareness as well. So I think that principle behind Me Too can be very powerful, not just in the media or in politics, but in the business world as well.
Beautiful. Yeah, thank you. I also like the next one. I think that's more of a little bit of a technical question, but it's also pretty loaded. What about quotas in hiring?
Wow, whoever typed that, you're trying to get me in trouble. So quotas are the idea that we're going to just say we're going to get a set number of people to be more representative, to be more diverse. I think that I would prefer to not say that we're going to have a set number. I would say that we're going to expand where we look for talent, right? So don't say that we need 3 women and 5 black people and 2 gay people or whatever, but say that, you know what? If our company looks the way that it is, it's because we've made decisions about where we find talent. We've made decisions about what colleges to go to recruit. We made decisions about where we place our job ads. We made decisions about how we even write our job descriptions. Why don't we fix that? Why don't we make our job descriptions more inclusive of women? And quick example, studies have shown that men will look at a job description and say, I can't do any of these things, but I can do one. I should apply. I'm qualified. Women will say, I can do almost all of these things, but I can't do this one. I'm not qualified, so I won't apply. That's just how we socialize women, unfortunately. But there are techniques that you can Google. I can talk to me after or tweet me of how you can make your job descriptions more inclusive of women. And then, figure out where are we going, where are we not going to find talent? What are the campuses? What are the groups that we should go to let them know we're looking for talent? And if you believe that talent is evenly distributed, meaning that it exists in all racial groups and all genders and it's everywhere, then you should go get it wherever it is. And that means that you're going to have to probably be more inclusive in where you find talent. So that's what I would do instead of strict quotas.
Yeah, that's perfect. Maybe time for one more, that top one. I think this is a question of causality, like whether diversity actually is a cause of business success.
Sure.
And I think I just want to say that your example of software development as something that we're all aware of, and how diversity actually works there to the benefit of all, and shows it's not a zero-sum game, works really nicely.
Right.
Are there like causalities like that?
Yeah.
Or?
So I think the question is asking that, these companies that have become more diverse have seen better business relationships. So is there a causal relationship saying because we became more diverse, that's why we have these increased revenues and increased net margins? So I think that there is a link, but so I don't think it's either or. I think it's yes and. I think that yes, because these companies have brought in more diverse perspectives and more backgrounds and more ideas, they get better results. But I think also the process of becoming more open-minded, of saying what can we do to make sure that we're attracting everyone, that also has the benefit of making your company more successful. I think that open-minded companies generally get better results.
Perfect.
All right, I think that's all that we have time for.
Yes.
Thank you for your questions. Please, you can find me on Twitter or LinkedIn. If I didn't answer your question, tweet at me or LinkedIn with me, and I'll get to it. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And as a token of our appreciation, we want to present you with a mug.
All right.
It's a special mug because it's a mug.
Look at
It
that.
has your photo there.
Look at
Or
that.
A drawing, rather. Yes.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Very much.
I really
Thank you.
appreciate it. All right.
Again,
Thanks,
big
everyone.
hand.